Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Michael Lawrence, Chief Executive of Asia House. Welcome to the Asia House Signature Conference for 2017, Asia Trade in the New Global Order. We're thrilled to be holding our conference in Hong Kong today, and we're delighted that you've been able to join us, so thank you very much for being here. The global trade order is in the midst of dramatic change. Now, we've assembled policymakers, business leaders and influencers from around the world to look at this unprecedented reshaping of trading architecture, what the next policy moves are likely to be, and how businesses can position themselves in these unpredictable times. We have a packed program. To get us underway, I'd like to invite Lord Stephen Green, the Chairman of Asia House, to formally open the conference. Please welcome to the stage Stephen Green.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a huge pleasure for me to be standing in front of you today as Chairman of Asia House. It gives me a wonderful excuse to keep on coming back to Hong Kong wearing a slightly different hat from the one that I used to wear when I came to Hong Kong very regularly. Asia House is on the move. We are a business-focused, business-supported group based in London whose only focus is to encourage connectivity between Europe and Asia so that businesses at each end can get to know more about each other and help each other to do more business with each other. That's our role in the 21st century. It's never more relevant than now. And it's extremely exciting for us that this is our first major conference outside of London. You might well ask why it's taken us this long, but in any case, we are on the road. We're going to have an annual signature conference in Asia, and we wanted to start in the city which is in so many ways the spiritual home of international connectivity and borderless trade, Hong Kong. I'm not going to take up any more of your time because we have an extremely distinguished guest keynote speaker who needs no introduction from me. I'd like you to all give a very warm welcome to Mrs. Carrie Lam Cheng Newton-Noor, the Chief Executive of the Special Administrative Region of Hong Kong. Carrie.
Lord Green, Consul General, Michael, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Let me first thank Asia House for holding its signature conference in Hong Kong this year. The reason why it has taken so long is probably because Asia House is waiting for a lady chief executive. I'm delighted to join you, especially when it was my idea to Michael during my London visit in September last year that Asia House should consider hosting an event in Hong Kong in 2017 when we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the establishment of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. And I thought it was extremely befitting for Asia House with a mission to drive economic and political engagement between Europe and Asia to discuss about Asia from this vantage point of Hong Kong, especially with the Hong Kong-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement then in sight. I'm pleased to say that Hong Kong signed this milestone FTA with the 10 member nations of ASEAN in the Philippines on the 12th of November this year. That is only 2 weeks ago, just in time for this important conference. Of course, what I could not have expected then was my coming here to speak to you in my capacity as the Chief Executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. So I hope this little unplanned coincidence of my involvement will make this Asia House event in Hong Kong a more memorable one. This is an auspicious year for Hong Kong as we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the establishment of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. Over the past 20 years, we have seen increasing economic integration with the mainland of China. This has brought and will continue to bring heightened opportunities to us. This is also a special year for Hong Kong and the ASEAN, especially in the context of a more progressive strategy to strengthen Hong Kong's relationship with Southeast Asia. Apart from signing the Hong Kong-ASEAN FTA, we opened our second economic and trade office in ASEAN situated in Jakarta, Indonesia, earlier this year. Hitherto, our first and only representation in the entire ASEAN region used to be just Singapore. And in my maiden policy address delivered last month, I announced the setting up of a third office in Bangkok, Thailand. Since taking office on the 1st of July, I have already visited 4 ASEAN nations, Singapore, Thailand, Myanmar, and Vietnam, to call on leaders to renew ties and to explore further cooperation. 2 important events have also taken place earlier this year, which put Asia on the spotlight. China hosted the first heavyweight Belt and Road Summit in Beijing in May, while the APEC economic leaders gathered in Da Nang, Vietnam in November to discuss issues of mutual concern. Indeed, the ASEAN perspectives are becoming increasingly important for practical reasons. For the past 25 years or so, Asia's economy has grown by around 6% a year, and several countries therein have become economic powerhouses. As a result, the world economy, at least in terms of GDP, is shifting east and south at an extraordinary speed. And many Asian enterprises have emerged, not only responding to their domestic populous markets, but also entering the competitive global stage. It is widely expected that Asia will continue to be the engine of global economic growth for the foreseeable future. In this respect, I must congratulate Asia House for its insight in putting together a publication entitled Asia 2025 last year to, in the words of Sir John Boyd, the former Asia House chairman, offer helpful clues as to how this region will look to powerfully shape the world in the next decade. I am much honored to be one of the 25 contributors to that publication, offering my perspective on the role of Hong Kong and our aspiration to become Asia's hyper-connected world city. Connectivity has long been Hong Kong's recipe for success. As a global trade, business, and tourism center, Hong Kong's extensive networks of business and professional links would not be possible without the physical infrastructure to make it happen. Our international airport lies at the heart of Asia and serves as a hub that puts half of the world's population within a 5-hour flight. Our port serves some 500 destinations worldwide. We are well connected by road and rail to Guangdong Province and the Pearl River Delta, which are powerhouses in manufacturing and high-tech industries. These land links will be significantly enhanced as within the next 12 to 18 months, we will commission 3 major pieces of cross-boundary infrastructure, which will significantly transform our links with the mainland and beyond, accelerating the flow of goods, people, capital, and information between Hong Kong and the mainland. In doing so, they will underscore our status as the region's trade, business, and logistics hub, boosting opportunities for Hong Kong and for the companies that partner with Hong Kong. So what are these 3 pieces of major infrastructure? First is the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, the world's longest combined subsea tunnel and bridge, which will cut journey time between the Hong Kong International Airport and Zhuhai or Macau from 4 hours to about 45 minutes, accelerating our economic integration with the Western Pearl River Delta region. Indeed, most of the Pearl River Delta's major cities will then be reachable within a 3-hour drive. Second is the 26-kilometer Hong Kong section of the Express Rail Link, which will slash journey time between Guangzhou and Hong Kong on a non-stop basis to just 48 minutes. No less important, it will connect Hong Kong to our country's national rail network and its 22,000 kilometers of high-speed track. Third is a new border crossing, our 7th land boundary control point, which will greatly enhance the connection between Hong Kong and the eastern part of Shenzhen, Huizhou, and all the way to the Fujian province. Increased connections will mean new development opportunities for Hong Kong. Our enhanced connectivity will be particularly valuable to Hong Kong as the Belt and Road Initiative and the Guangdong-Hong Kong-Macau Bay Area development gain traction. The Bay Area, which counts 9 Guangdong cities along with Macau and Hong Kong, is China's most affluent region. The Bay Area will allow us to draw on the combined strengths of the participating cities and their 66 million inhabitants, bringing immense prospects to Hong Kong and our trading partners. The twin corridors of the Belt and Road are home to more than 60 economies in the 3 continents of Asia, Europe, and Africa. As President Xi Jinping said at the APEC CEO Summit earlier this month, the Belt and Road Initiative is from China, but it belongs to the world. It is rooted in history, but oriented towards the future. It will enhance not only connectivity in trade, but also interconnected development in infrastructure, policies, financial services, and people-to-people bond. Before I go on, let me first express my deepest gratitude to Lord Green for his most optimistic remark in a recent article that of all Asia's trading hubs, none is more favorably placed than Hong Kong to capitalize on Belt and Road in particular, and Asia's rise more broadly. Amidst such exciting opportunities in a globalized economy, how should that Asia trade be conducted, which is the theme of this Asia House Conference? Let me share a few thoughts from a Hong Kong perspective. As a founding member of the World Trade Organization, Hong Kong is a staunch supporter of free trade. For 23 years in a row, we have been ranked as the world's freest economy by the Heritage Foundation. Free and open economy, well connected to the outside world, underpins Hong Kong's prosperity. We have benefited immensely from free trade, which is instrumental in helping and developing Hong Kong into an international trade and business center as it is today. We shall continue to enhance connectivity and achieve interconnected development. However, despite all the benefits free trade and connected development can bring, we do see recently some worrying signs of rising protectionism. Why would this happen? One reason could be that the gains brought by economic globalization have not been enjoyed by all, giving rise to social discontent, income disparity, and a growing sense of disconnect, especially between the people and the government, particularly young people. It is tempting to blame free trade for such social problems, and protectionism may easily gain popularity. But the fundamental solution lies in making economic development more inclusive and delivering benefits to our people. Inclusive growth is highly relevant in the age of globalization. Economies in Asia must redouble their efforts to advance economic, financial, and social inclusion with a vision to build an inclusive, accessible, sustainable, healthy, and resilient community. As a government, we must advance progress towards achieving full, productive, and quality employment, and progressively achieve and sustain income growth for all members of society, especially women, youth, persons with disabilities, and other vulnerable groups, and enable them to seize these global opportunities. Building an inclusive community is and will continue to be my government's priority. In this respect, it is relevant to note that some 60% of our recurrent government budget is spent on education, social welfare, and medical services. Spending on social welfare and poverty alleviation has surged by 71% in the past 5 years, with a range of initiatives pioneered by the Commission on Poverty, which I chaired in my former capacity as the Chief Secretary for Administration. We will continue to enhance the standard of living of all members of the community so that they can feel the benefits brought by free trade and economic growth. A greater concern for the natural environment and a commitment to sustainable growth should, in my view, be another important dimension of Asia trade. As responsible global citizens, we must actively tackle climate change, improve air and water quality, and reduce waste. Hong Kong is able to benefit from connected, inclusive, and sustainable growth in the past 20 years under one country, two systems. We enjoy unique advantages under this one country, two systems. We are an international financial center and are universally acknowledged as among the best cities in the world for doing business. Our fiber network, capable of carrying high-speed broadband, covers the entire city. Our legal and professional services are highly regarded, and it's all underpinned by the rule of law, an independent judiciary, and rights and freedoms guaranteed under the Basic Law. Ladies and gentlemen, Hong Kong's long-standing prowess in trade, coupled with our financial, legal, and administrative expertise and experience, can play a pivotal role in Asia trade in a new global order. Indeed, in the last WTO survey, Hong Kong is the world's 6th largest exporter of merchandise trade and 15th largest commercial services exporter. We are world-class importers as well, ranking 7th in goods and 17th in services. We trade with more than 200 countries and regions, creating opportunities for millions upon millions of people. But there is no room for complacency. In taking Hong Kong's economy forward, I said in my policy address that we will continue to respect the rules governing the economy and market operations and promote free trade. At the same time, we will leverage our unique advantages under one country, two systems. We will inject new and continuous impetus to Hong Kong's economy through playing new roles of facilitation and promotion and making timely investments. We will conduct more government-to-government dialogues with the mainland and overseas countries. I'm sure Asia House, with its expertise on Asia and as the leading pan-Asian organization in the United Kingdom, will continue to provide that forum for decision makers, business leaders, and opinion formers to engage in high-level discussions that direct business and political strategies. So my thanks once again to Asia House for bringing this prestigious event to Hong Kong. I wish you all stimulating discussions today, and for guests coming from other places, a wonderful stay in Hong Kong. Thank you very much.
Our enormous thanks to the Chief Executive of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, for opening this conference. Please join me in thanking her once more. One of the many reasons Asia House chose Hong Kong as the venue for today's conference was, as you heard the Chief Executive say, she suggested it at a discussion we had last year. But it was also ahead of the free trade agreement that at the time was being negotiated between Hong Kong and ASEAN. It has, of course, subsequently been signed, so timing is fortunate in terms of this conference. Dr. Serafino S. Rodolfo, Undersecretary, DTI Industry Development and Trade Policy Group, and Managing Head, Board of Investments of the Philippines, was one of the chief architects of that deal. Undersecretary Rodolfo acts as the Philippines Trade Minister in ASEAN Economic Ministers meetings. He oversees Philippines' negotiating positions across trade fora, from bilateral engagements to ASEAN, APEC, and the WTO. Now, Dr. Rodolfo is on his way to Washington, but has kindly stopped off here to address this conference. Please welcome to the stage the Philippines Undersecretary of Trade, Dr. Serafino Rodolfo.
Morning to everyone. I'm actually not on my way to the US, but I have to go back to the Philippines in a few hours to give a briefing to our secretary in terms of our participation in the WTO Ministerial Conference in Buenos Aires, and then from there go to the US tonight. As you may well know, one of the major highlights of this for the Philippine case of the ASEAN Summit a few weeks ago is the has been the announcement between President Trump and President Rodrigo Duterte of a opening of discussions for a bilateral FTA between the Philippines and the US. So this is the reason I had to urgently go to the US tonight. Well, good morning to everyone, in particular to Chief Excellency, to the Chief Executive, Madam Carrie Lam, and also thanks to Asia House, Michael Lawrence, Chief Executive, and Lord Green, the Chairman of Asia House. To friends and colleagues from ASEAN, in particular, Dr. Lim Hong Hin, and my very good friend, Vice Minister Tran Quoc Can from Vietnam, and Minister Bambam from Indonesia. Also, special welcome also to former Secretary of Finance for the Philippines, Cesar Purisima. Before I start quickly to give you a quick rundown of the achievements of ASEAN in its 50th anniversary, let me just give you a Philippine perspective of our ASEAN hosting. You can actually read all of the achievements, 10 out of 11 of our economic priority deliverables having been substantially delivered. Actually, it's 8 out of 11 fully completed, with 2 more were technically completed because we still have the remainder of the year, and 1 which was still a work in progress. Well, our basic philosophy in any international event such as ASEAN or APEC, well, it will just like be a fiesta, a series of happy gatherings among high-profile individuals, if there is no link between what you do domestically and what you are pushing for in terms of your hosting agenda. It's actually an opportunity for the Philippines to move forward in our international agenda. So that's the very significance of our ASEAN hosting. A few weeks ago saw the convergence of leaders and senior officials from countries and economies that represent about 90% of Philippine exports. They converged in Manila during the ASEAN Summit. In addition to formal meetings, there were bilateral meetings. So a day, for example, of President Duterte would have meant 15 to 19 meetings starting at 7:30 and ending way past midnight. For the domestic situation, the Philippines is a country that is one of the fastest growing in ASEAN, in fact, in the whole of Asia. Third quarter growth rate, GDP growth rate was just recently announced at 6.9%. Our manufacturing has grown at 9.4%. But the paradox is that we have been asking this question: how can a country that is the fastest growing in this region, fastest growing region in the world, also suffer from one of the worst poverty? We cannot rely on expecting that growth will trickle down to the marginalized. And in this case, marginalized is a big 1/4 of our population. In other countries, when we discuss this in the WTO, marginalization is in the context of some other status, but in the Philippines, it's really in the context of poverty. There are people who are marginalized in the first place because they could not participate regardless of age, regardless of gender. So instead of relying just on trickle down, we cannot tell poor people, just wait because pretty soon development, you will also benefit from development. Those who are marginalized should already be able to participate in growth. Rather than expecting to be beneficiaries of growth, they should already become agents of growth. Thus, we have embarked on an advocacy at the domestic level of inclusive business. One major factor also to consider is that in the Philippines, most of our establishments are micro, small, and medium enterprises, or what we call MISMIS. Maybe about 96% of establishments would belong to this category of MISMIS, with about 92 belonging to micro and small. And I guess that is true also for most of ASEAN and most of Asia. That's why participation of MISMIS in global trade is important. I remember Secretary Greg Domingo, our former Trade Secretary, during the last day of the APEC ministerial meeting in Beijing way back in 2014, while we were introducing what would be our hosting priority for APEC in 2015. And while everyone was discussing about FTA-AP, he said that in the Philippines, because people have not been able to participate in trade, there is strong opposition for FTAs. That's why he said that during our hosting year in 2015 then, we will place MISMIS at front and center of our APEC hosting. And Secretary Purisima subsequently also pushed for inclusive financial integration during our hosting year. And the MISMIS agenda has since been carried by Peru and then by Vietnam excellently during the last APEC meetings. Our president, when he attended the APEC summit in Da Nang, talked about inclusive globalization. Our push for inclusive business domestically was elevated in APEC as inclusive globalization by our president. And during our ASEAN hosting, as inclusive regional integration. Yes, globalization has unleashed competition, leading to tremendous advancement in efficiencies, unlocking tremendous growth. But competition also leads to winners and losers, which is why there is a need to complement competition with cooperation and collaboration. We are not pushing for help, nor are we seeking assistance. In fact, the mantra in the Philippines now is trade, not aid. Just about maybe 4 weeks ago, when I was about to present and get for cabinet approval of a technical or development assistance project from a key partner of the Philippines that amounts to about $80 million. I won't say which currency exactly. You might guess the donor country. But just as I was about to, needless to say, it's one of the biggest technical assistance that we would have received. But I was asked by the cabinet secretaries, are they already allowing our bananas entry into their market? And I said, no, sir. Then we won't hear your presentation. Don't proceed with your presentation. Tell them, we want trade, not aid. So we are not pushing for help. We are not seeking assistance. Rather, we are pushing for commercial market access. We are pushing for fair rules, and we are pushing for partnerships. Thus, in our hosting, we push for a recognition at the highest level among leaders for inclusive business. And we complemented this with projects that promote the partnership between MSMEs or MISMEs and multinational enterprises. It's first. And second, knowing that cumbersome trade rules remain the biggest stumbling block for MISMEs to be able to trade, we push for self-certification, and we hope that this could be technically completed by the end of the year. We also push for logistics connectivity between certain members of ASEAN, which are really isolated from the mainland. I'm speaking about Philippines and Indonesia because of our archipelagic setup. So there was a maiden voyage of the roll-on of vessels between Davao and Bitung. And then we also push for a work plan on e-commerce as a platform for MSME integration into trade by using its potential for efficient production networks and marketing efficiency. So those are just the perspective from the Philippines when we hosted the ASEAN. But just to officially report on the result, I'll skip some of the official report already. Okay. So our main goal as chair of the ASEAN Economic Ministers in the past year has been to ensure that those at the bottom of the pyramid can participate in trade, particularly the development of micro, small, and medium enterprises. We are committed in having ASEAN's economic growth become more inclusive. We have been advocating this view in other fora, including the recent APEC summit in Da Nang, Vietnam, wherein we called on discarding the old view that while trade creates tremendous wealth, it also generates winners and losers. While competition has yielded efficiency gains in trade, we need complementation, cooperation, and collaboration to develop an inclusive globalization model where everyone emerges as winners. The Philippines ASEAN chairmanship this year is a remarkable success achieved through the concerted efforts of the 10 member states and continuous open dialogue and cooperation with external partners. 2017's chairmanship is guided by the banner theme of Partnering for Change, Engaging the World, under which there were 6 thematic priorities. First, a people-oriented and people-centered ASEAN. Second, peace and stability in the region. Third, maritime security and cooperation. Fourth, inclusive innovation-led growth. Fifth, ASEAN's resiliency. And sixth, ASEAN, a model of regionalism, a global player. So let me focus on the fourth one, inclusive innovation-led growth. Under the ASEAN Economic Community, or AEC, the Philippines focus and push for initiatives that lead to the promotion of an inclusive and innovative region. So under this general theme are 3 strategic measures. First one, increasing trade and investment. Second, integrating micro, small, and medium enterprises in global value chains. And third, developing an innovation-driven economy. So one overall banner theme of Partnering for Change, Engaging the World, under which there was a priority theme on inclusive innovation-led growth. And under that, there were 3 strategic measures, as I mentioned. So under those 3 strategic measures, there were 11 priority deliverables. So out of the 11, 8 were fully achieved, 2 were technically achieved, and 1 is a work in progress. So those which were fully achieved include the following: the focus and strategic action agenda on investments. This essentially is the linking between ASEAN MISMIS and ASEAN MNEs. So there was a statement, but you know, in ASEAN negotiations or in ASEAN events, there are many statements left and right. That's why for us, we said, okay, let's not just stop with a statement from the ministers or a recognition of the importance of this particular topic from among our leaders. Let us, in parallel to this, let us complement this with an actual project, which is why in that actual project that happened in October 19 in Manila, there were about 90 companies from ASEAN that essentially is a business matching between MISMIS and MNEs. Then I mentioned already the ASEAN RORO, so that's the second deliverable. Then we also adopted the ASEAN Seamless Trade Facilitation Indicators to assist ASEAN in its effort to design and implement trade facilitation policies, regulations, and procedures. Essentially, with this indicator, we are targeting to reduce transaction cost in trade by 10% by 2020. And then we have the ASEAN Inclusive Business Framework. And then we had the ASEAN Work Program on Electronic Commerce. And then we also had a country visit of the Philippines as part of a monitoring system for the ASEAN. We're trying to introduce this similar to what they have in APEC. And then we have the action agenda for mainstreaming women's economic empowerment in ASEAN, and then an ASEAN declaration on innovation. So those were the 8 fully delivered priorities. The 2 technically completed refer to the region-wide self-certification scheme, which is targeted to be fully implemented by 2018. So hopefully we could complete this scheme by the end of this year and then fully implement it by 2018. There's another country that is not yet on board fully on the self-certification scheme. So there's it may happen that it will be on a pathfinder basis. And then the second is the substantial conclusion of the ASEAN Trade in Services Agreement. So those are the two agreements that we see would be fully completed by the end of this year. And then, of course, what remains as a work in progress is the RCEP. However, the level of engagement on RCEP has been unprecedented during our hosting year. In 2017, we had, I think, 4 trade negotiating committee level. So meaning these are the very senior technical level meetings, the lead negotiators level. And we had 3 ministerial level meetings that happened, plus the very first RCEP summit, so meaning the leaders themselves. And I believe if you read the statement of the leaders about the RCEP, you could detect the certain level of frustration about the progress within which the RCEP is being negotiated. And as a result, and also because within the context of what has been happening globally, they have tasked ministers and officials to substantially conclude the RCEP by 2018, so during Singapore's hosting. So I think that is a major achievement. And also one major achievement is that the ASEAN ministers have already put forward a proposed landing zone. So for the first time, the ASEAN ministers have gotten together and in a consensus, we have already proposed a way forward for the RCEP. We hope that this would make Singapore's hosting a bit easier when it comes to the RCEP negotiations. Now, on top of these 11 priority measures, the Philippines was also able to shepherd the resolution of long-standing issues through its chairmanship of high-level economic meetings, ministerial meetings, and also with the collaboration of everyone in ASEAN. I refer specifically to the ASEAN-Hong Kong-China Free Trade Agreement and the ASEAN-Hong Kong Investment Agreement, which was signed by the trade ministers of ASEAN and Hong Kong last November 12. And in addition to that, issues related to the finalization of the protocol to amend the ASEAN-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement to incorporate the chapters on trade in services, investment, and movement of natural persons. So the main stumbling blocks towards the finalization of this protocol has already been resolved. So actually, Dr. Lim, I think they will be having a legal scrubbing session ready this December or towards the end of this month, to December. So those are very critical for us. First one is the ASEAN-Hong Kong FTA, and the second one would be the ASEAN-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. We're able to move on this to find the conclusion on these issues during our hosting year. Now, in addition to these two long-standing issues, we have also opened up other opportunities for ASEAN. And I refer specifically to our engagement with Canada. So ASEAN embarked on a joint feasibility study with Canada and have agreed on the conduct of exploratory discussions to further assess the merits of a possible FTA. So actually, the more adjectives, the more terms that you include in a sentence, it means that the longer time it will take. And then ASEAN and EU commenced discussions on the possibility of resuming the negotiations for a region-to-region FTA, which has been on hiatus since 2009. And then an FTA with Russia is being explored as a region-to-region FTA between ASEAN and the Eurasian Economic Union, with information sharing and confidence building activities to be undertaken as stepping stones to a more formal FTA talk. So again, many terms that enter into that sentence. So in summary, what we have done during our hosting year in ASEAN was to push for our advocacy and inclusive business at the domestic level, elevate it towards inclusive regional integration at the ASEAN level, and also pushing it as inclusive globalization in Vietnam during APEC. Inclusive globalization and regional integration, these are not apologies or these are not efforts to reform globalization. Rather, for me, we see, for us in the Philippines, we see this as the only logical alternative to drive globalization, to deepen its roots, widen its coverage, and in the process, accelerate globalization. This is the only alternative that we see for us to counter the growing protectionism, the strive towards inclusive globalization. So thank you.
Secretary Rodolfo, thank you very much indeed. Clearly great ambitions for ASEAN and real commitment to globalisation. Now I'd like to move to our first panel discussion of the day, and I'd like to invite our speakers, please, to take the stage. Tim Stratford, Managing Partner, Covington and Burling Beijing office. He's the former Assistant US Trade Representative. Mr. Stratford is the most senior former US trade official working as a member of the US business community in China. Please, Tim, take a seat. Dr. Jonathan Choi, Chairman of the Sunwire Group. Now, Dr. Choi holds a wide range of public positions. These include member of the National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference of the PRC, Chairman of the Hong Kong Chinese General Chamber of Commerce, and Standing Committee member of the All China Federation of Industry and Commerce. Anne Ruth Harkis. Anne Ruth Harkis is former State Secretary, Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy in Germany, and she currently holds a number of non-exec roles in the private sector in Europe, and also, I'm delighted to say, she is on the board of Asia House. Lord Ashdown, a member of the House of Lords in the UK and former leader of the Liberal Democrats. Paddy Ashdown is a lead supporter of the Remain campaign in the debate over the UK leaving the European Union. And he spoke at Asia House not that long ago, and I must say your predictions have largely been true to date, so I'm sure, look forward to hearing the latest on that. And Cesar Purisima, Asia Fellow at the Milken Institute and former Secretary of Finance of the Philippines. Cesar Purisima has been widely recognised for his efforts in turning the sick man of Asia into a bright star. During his 6-year tenure as finance minister, the Philippine economy grew by an average 6.2%, the fastest pace in 4 decades. He restored market confidence, he boosted credit ratings something like 24 times, and he also won 7 Finance Minister of the Year awards in 6 years. That in itself an achievement. Please welcome my panellists. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Tim, I'd like to start with you. I was at APEC, I'm sure many of you were there too, and we heard President Trump's speech, quite aggressive speech, clearly going to pursue the America First policy. He said, and I quote, "We are not going to let the US be taken advantage of anymore." Are we looking at is there a potential for a trade war with China?
I certainly hope not. I can't totally exclude the possibility. I think the problem is there's a consensus in the United States, and this would have been true no matter who had won the presidential election. There's a consensus in the United States that the current arrangement is not working the way it should. The real debate is whether the WTO tools are adequate for addressing the problem or not. What is the problem? The problem perceived in the United States is that China has changed its course somewhat from what was originally anticipated when they joined the WTO. Their economic development model now is so focused on industrial policies across such a wide range of industries using some very powerful industrial policy tools. And the result is that we don't see competition and we don't see openness in the way that we had originally anticipated. So again, no matter who had won the presidential election, I think you would have seen some real changes in US policy. And the real debate now in the United States is, can we address these problems within the framework of the WTO, or will it be too much of a strain on the WTO? In the WTO, if you see a country that is subsidizing its industries or precluding market access in certain ways, you can bring WTO disputes. Or you can also have trade remedy cases, anti-dumping, countervailing duty cases. But if you try to do that with China, with sort of the opacity about the way some of these policies are carried out, and when they're carried out across so many industries, you end up having legions of lawyers trying to negotiate trade deals. It's kind of like the way the US and EU deal with aviation, fights between Airbus and Boeing. But if you took that and put that across the entire economy, you don't really have a workable system. So what I expect, and Ambassador Lighthizer said in Da Nang, that the US is willing to use its own economic leverage to pursue some of the issues that it has. And that, to me, is code for we're not necessarily going to focus on whether what we do is WTO consistent or not. So that's the concern. On the one hand, I do think that the US is justified in raising some very legitimate concerns. On the other hand, China is finding that its economic development model seems to be working pretty well for it. So you have an irresistible force and an unmovable object, and that's why I hope that we'll find a resolution that doesn't result in a trade war.
I want to come back a bit later to what the next regulatory changes might be in the US. But Jonathan Choi, I'd like to turn to you now. President Xi's speech, in stark contrast to that of President Trump, spoke about globalization, free trade, liberalization. What's the next move for China? Because some of the mood music coming out of the US is of some concern, I'd imagine.
I just feel I was also in Da Nang in the APEC meeting because I'm also an APEC member representing Hong Kong, China. And actually, there are two speeches that most of the members would like to hear. The first is Mr. Trump's, but it's Mr. Xi. And for Mr. Trump, it's very clear that he said America first. And also he mentioned that not only America first, it's all Japan first, Korea first. You can protect your interests. Therefore, we have a discussion on the floor that if everybody having a priority in their own country, how can we compromise? It's not easy. But in President Xi's speech, it's different. It's calling globalization, free trade, liberalization, all these things. And it's a win-win situation. That we feel that the position of China and US has changed a lot. And for China today, I think I don't feel that there will be a trade war. I just feel they're compromise. You see that after President Trump went to Beijing, you see, immediately he signed a big deal with US, $100 billion of product we purchase from US into China because there's a trade deficit, we understand that. Secondly, you know that was announced 2 days ago from the Ministry of Finance from China that the import duty of products from overseas will be reduced from 17.7% to about, on average, 7%. It's a big reduction. Therefore, I just feel that China is compromising. They welcome, because there's a big market in China for trade, they welcome products from all over the world to come into China. And I just feel that one of the movement of this is China, just like years ago, they entered the WTO. They want to be work together with the world in general. Therefore, they want the local companies in China to be more competitive. If they reduce the import duty, how can they survive? The companies in China have to be competitive. I think that's good for China. That's good for the people of China. Therefore, I just feel in the long run, China will be more integrated in the international world. And they want to be competitive. They want to have free trade and globalization. That's what I feel in the future.
So you think that these policy shifts will continue and China will compromise and avoid a trade war and play I guess, to more international standards or more Western standards in terms of some of the trade issues that are of concern?
I just feel that because you see that after we have seen that one President Xi has been speaking in like the BRICS in the Fuzhou and also in the G20 in Hangzhou and in the Belt and Road Summit at May 14th this year, I just feel that the value and the idea they're talking about is similar to the West has been talking in years. We just feel it's very interesting. It's the Chinese president talking about peaceful development and coexistence and prosperity, all these things. I think it's the new idea of China. I think China have confidence now that they can fully integrate in the present world.
One of the other big disruptive events of the last 12 months or so has been Britain's decision to leave the EU, and there's much talk in Britain and in Europe about turning to Asia. And Ruth, let me turn to you now. Is there real momentum for the EU to develop greater, more active trading relationships in Asia, or is it just too busy with the whole UK issue?
When I arrived here reading the newspapers and preparatory documents, I was struck, of course, in Hong Kong, how strong the focus is on the Brexit issue. I think it is a complex situation. It is a very complex negotiation, but the end stage is in sight. And while there might still be a lot of one-off issues that could derail a smooth negotiating path, Europe will have the ability, in the prevailing mood of economic nationalism, of the protectionist forces, to push for more free trade agreements, be they multilateral, be they bilateral, certainly with the ASEAN and the Asian Pacific region, because speaking of my country, we depend on favorable trade conditions, we depend on strong export, and we continue to be strongly in favor of free trade. Let me just, Michael, say two things about, or 3 points, why we actually are in the situation that we are in. Globalization is not just a term by the chattering classes, but it was actually came about by two historic one-off events. The first one, and the previous speaker alluded to this, is the entry of China into the global market. And I liked what the gentleman said, that China is now comfortable to be in the global market. I consider that an achievement. The second one-off event is and has been the demise of the Soviet Union. So the creation of a number of newly independent, diverging but fairly productive economies to the east, to the former east of the European Union. They all needed to be integrated in global markets, in the European market, and that has contributed to stronger and changed global trade routes and supply chains. So in essence, and to your question, no, I think the European Union will have the capacity, the energy, and the focus to integrate more into the global economy and to be a very strong partner for Asia, Asia-Pacific, and ASEAN.
Paddy Ashdown, the situation in the UK, much talk about new trade deals in the post-Brexit world. Does the UK have the capacity, the bandwidth, the skill to negotiate deals with Asia, and how successful is it likely to be?
Well, Michael, I think the short answer to that question is it has the capacity, it has the will if it leaves the European Union, which I still hope it won't. But it has to accept that in all circumstances that I can see, its negotiating hand is going to be weaker outside the European Union than it would have been within it. Let me just step back, if I may, without wishing to take up too much time. I mean, one of the things I do is write books, and I'm writing a book at present, which requires me to be deep in research into the 1930s, and I'm bound to say that the similarities between the age in which we live and the 1930s scares me to death. We don't have a madman intent on conflict, and we have stronger democracies than the Weimar Republic, which could be overturned, but nevertheless, the mood of our times, undoubtedly, ladies and gentlemen, is towards protectionism and isolationism, fed in large measure, in my view, by a cry of rage from those who have been left out, particularly in the advanced Western democracies, from the fruits of globalization. And this is a revolt against globalization, and that's what's behind this. And I think if we are looking at trying to reassert the effectiveness of our governmental and democratic systems, then we have to recognize that and begin to tackle it. How do we better distribute the benefits of globalization? Anybody who knows anything about anything knows that that's a good thing for everybody, and if we reverse that trend, we will all suffer. A few words on Britain. I mean, I start from the proposition, Michael, which will not be surprising to you, that this is a miserable, terrible, ridiculous, stupid decision that my country took.
Could you be a bit more direct here, Patrick? I didn't quite understand what
if you want me to be, I will. It denies all the things that I think Britain is famous for, and it gives Britain strength. And it makes me feel extremely sad. I was on the day it happened, I was deeply... I saw it coming, as you know, and made a prediction about it. So I'm going to make another prediction. And like that one, this one isn't going to be popular at the time either. Nevertheless, at the start of the summer holidays, I took the view that on balance we were going to have to grit our teeth and go through with Brexit. I now take the view that on balance, I think we probably won't go through with Brexit. On balance, not by much, 52-48 perhaps, but the other way around. And the reason for that is largely not because we couldn't if we wanted to, but because of the gross, total, utter, dysfunctional, dystopian nature of our government. Shall I put that more diplomatically?
Please do. Yes.
I'm sorry, you must discount for the fact that you're listening to an opposition politician and one who's very angry about the decision that we've been led into, largely in the interests of the Conservative Party. But the reality, nevertheless, is this, that first of all, the cabinet is divided. Even if you had a trade deal, it doesn't know what kind of trade deal it wants to get because it disagrees. Is it going to be this kind of soft one or is it going to be that kind of soft one? The Prime Minister, it seems to me, is largely at present without any kind of authority. I don't think this government is frankly capable of delivering anything. If you ask them to deliver the Sunday newspapers, they probably couldn't. And the second thing is that we are now so far behind the curve, as you will know, we're now so far behind the curve because we wasted so much time that actually it will be impossible to deliver a good trade deal. So one way or the other, I think that the clock is going to be stopped. In the classic case of the European Union, it has a wonderful diplomatic technique. It simply pretends that tomorrow is actually today. The clock is stopped and we just go on. Or there'll be a transitional deal. The idea that we will get a trade deal in the limited time left over to us, I think, is for the birds. Now, there are three things that are standing in the way. Anne said she thought they'd get there. Viewed from the European Union, I can understand why you do it. There's three things standing in Britain's way. One is the money. I think in the end, the money, we will reach a deal on the money. The second is the conditions for European citizens living in Britain. I think that can be done as well. The third is, in my view, almost impossible to solve, which is how do we solve the problem of the border in Northern Ireland? And the Irish government is now playing very hard ball on that, and I can understand why. The British government cannot achieve the only solution that will solve that problem, which is we call Ireland one trading bloc. We draw the economic border down the Irish Sea, because they are dependent on the Ulster Unionists, God help them, for their support in Parliament. And so I don't see how we arrive at a solution on that. And we'll have to, I mean, I just cannot see what that solution is. Mind you, I'm not sure everybody spotted this, so it may be helpful if I just outline this. Although the Irish government is playing a very hard line on this, and I understand why and sympathise with that, they simply say, if there is going to be a hard border in Northern Ireland, we will not sign off, you cannot proceed with trade talks, let alone an outcome deal. What that could lead to is a no deal, that we will go over the edge of the cliff and go to WTO. In those circumstances, it's probable that the European Union would have to impose a border in Ireland, because it couldn't have no border between one area that was in the WTO and not. And in the end, although the Irish government's playing very hard ball, they must know that if they push this too far and it goes to a no deal, they actually suffer in consequence. So there's a lot of balancing going on here. I think the last problem, and I finish here, is the House of Commons. The House of Commons is pretty well deadlocked now if you take the rebels in each of the parties. I'd think that the House of Commons would not vote for no deal, would not vote for a WTO solution. I think the House of Commons would not vote for a hard deal. I think the House of Commons could be brought to vote for a decent trade deal, but since the government is divided, it doesn't know how to deliver or negotiate a decent trade deal. So in the end, I think that this thing ends in possibly ends in some kind of stalemate. Here's my prediction, since I made the last one. By the way, I do have to remind those who do not watch the BBC that as I make this prediction, please remember that I am the man who sat in front of the television sets at the 2016 election and announced that if the results were indeed what they said, what the exit polls indicated, I would eat my hat. Since which I've had to eat 5 hats.
Yes. Remember.
One made of chocolate, one made of marzipan, one made of shortbread, and 2 absolute real hats, but very small ones. I actually think the government is now so dysfunctional it cannot last. And I think that at some stage during the next year, the British government will collapse in on its own dysfunctionality. I don't know the date, I don't know the time. I just think there is a moment when people will say this can't continue because they're so bad. Second thing is that my view is that if that were to happen, then either a second referendum, and I think that's on margin less likely, but more likely a general election, of which Brexit is the key element. In other words, it has the same function as a referendum, is likely to occur. And in those circumstances, given the pain the country is now suffering as a result of this stupid decision, I wouldn't be surprised to see the country take a different view than the one they took last time.
Thank you very much. I'll come back to those issues much covered there. Siddharth Parisma, ASEAN meetings must have seemed like a dream compared with what's going on in the UK and EU at the moment, if you listen to Paddy Ashdown.
It's equally entertaining, I think.
But is there an opportunity for ASEAN now? I go back to a few years ago, I think when you were in the UK, and the EU, I asked an EU official, what's the chances of an ASEAN-EU trade pact? Not really likely. Now, actively talking about it. So is this an opportunity for ASEAN to step up, for want of a better phrase, take advantage of the turmoil?
Well, I think there are opportunities for ASEAN, but ASEAN must get its act together. First, it must not forget what brought ASEAN to where it is now. No? 50 years ago, those of us who are old enough would know that the ASEAN countries were like dominoes. No? They were expected to fall. No? We were in the midst of the Indochina war. Fast forward now, with the end of the Indochina war, with the fall of the Soviet Union, we basically had stability. No? We also were blessed with domestic political stability. So the first condition that's necessary to continue ASEAN on the current path is stability. No? Stability in the South China Sea, domestic political stability, and two, the realization that individually, except Indonesia, all the ASEAN countries are small, and therefore they must band together and therefore keep the centrality of ASEAN. And given the giants around us and the various political international interests, we're being pulled left and right, and sometimes centrality of ASEAN is lost. No? But we must not forget that. And the third thing is the fact that ASEAN is probably the biggest beneficiary to globalization. More than any region, ASEAN's trade is covered by free trade agreements. I think over 60% of our trade is covered by free trade agreement. And therefore, to really take advantage of the current situation, we must act together and use ourselves as a catalyst to make sure that the push towards globalization continues. No? And that's why in the Manila ASEAN chairing, the push for what he referred to as MISMI, the MSMEs. No? Globalization has happened at the top. No? And the bulk of the smaller entities have actually lost out. And that's why we've seen the rise of populism, because there's a lot of people that have been left out. No? We need to bring them back. And we need to make sure that, globalization business is I think, the biggest public-private partnership. No? Governments actually, negotiate, but it is business that makes business happen. No? And therefore, we need enlightened business to actually come in. Obviously, it's nice to optimize profits, no? But they have to start talking about win-win strategies, complementation as a strategy. ASEAN got its confidence because there were enlightened companies that started and proved the fact that integration can be win-win. A good example is an EU company, Nestle. Early on, they approached different countries and said, we'd like to increase the scale of our factories around the region by concentrating production of certain products in certain countries, but not putting everything in one country. By doing so, it gave all the countries the confidence that we can actually integrate and win together. And that is why I think it's important that we, the private sector and government, really band together to make sure that we're able to take advantage of this. There are two other trends that I think we must not lose sight of, because there's been a study that says that a lot of the losses of jobs is not really due to globalization. It's actually due to technology. No? And with the increase in the pace of technological innovation, especially with AI and all of these developments, there will be more job losses in the future. And if we engage in this intramural about global trade and just focus on that and lose sight of the fact that technology is going on its own, no? And ultimately we might be caught in a surprise that we're actually trying to solve the wrong problem. And then in our part of the world, there's a third aspect, which is climate change. The Philippines, third most vulnerable, a big part of Asia is subject to climate change. That can be the other factor that can really change the whole equation. So in summary, my point is ASEAN needs to band together, needs to keep ASEAN centrality, needs to push for continued globalization, and need to keep its eye on developments in technology as an opportunity to leapfrog and not be caught by surprise. And at the same time, look at green opportunities as another engine for growth. And if we do so, then I think we will be able to continue the success we've had.
Okay. We'll turn back to the US now, and I mentioned earlier, there's talk of regulatory shifts, more closer look at Chinese investments. What is the next step? Let's be practical here. What's the next law going to be passed? What regulation will come into the US to deliver the America First policy?
Well, first of all, I think we have to ask what do we mean by America First? And I don't think that America First means America only. And I think that if you step back and say, okay, what is in the interest of any particular country? It's to trade with other countries. And you can't trade on unilateral terms. And so what we're seeing right now is a lot of reassessment going on, whether it's in the UK, Europe, in ASEAN, about what are the terms that work for countries best. And if you look at the last 10 years, if you take the top 25 economies in the world, in those 25 economies, 550 million people have seen their incomes either stagnate or decline. And so there's this feeling that whatever's happening right now is not working very well. And that's why you see Brexit, that's why you see things going on in the United States the way they are. So you do have to address the underlying problem. So we hear different models. We hear what Xi Jinping is saying, as Jonathan pointed out. But these different models will work differently for different countries. Let me read a short statement. This is what President Xi said at the signing ceremony with President Trump when all those deals were signed. He said, China is willing to expand its imports of LNG, crude oil, and petroleum products and other energy products from the United States. We will also explore the potential of U.S. exports of beef, cotton, and other agricultural products to China. We will also deepen cooperation on service trade, including in areas of tourism, movies, and education, while we also hope the U.S. will further ease its export control on civilian technologies and products to China. So what is he saying? He's saying we want your raw materials, your energy, your agricultural products, some of your services, and the technology that you haven't allowed us to access. There's not much mention of manufacturing goods in there at all, high-tech manufacturing. To the extent that that's what you want to trade with China, they really want to take that space for themselves. And so That's why if you look at the American companies doing business in China, in our AmCham China survey last year, 81% of the companies say they feel less welcome because of Chinese policies that are trying to carve out competitive space for those industries themselves. So the US is trying to look at the Chinese policies that are I was on a panel last week with the ambassador of Chile to China, and they sell agricultural products, raw materials, and some services to China, so they don't have any trade disputes at all. So the US is looking at China's policies and saying, okay, we don't think we should be excluded from the industrial sector, and we're concerned about what they're doing and how it's affecting these industries around the world. And so I think the next thing you're going to see is that the United States is going to have a closer scrutiny on Chinese investment in the US to see whether it's state-supported, to see whether it's trying to pursue an industrial policy that would develop a particular Chinese industry on terms that are not necessarily competitive in the sense that the WTO anticipates.
Jonathan Choi, that sounds like it will escalate tensions rather than ease them. Is there a view in China that China should start setting the rules as opposed to follow the lead of sort of Western trading norms?
I just feel that what you mentioned here is very interesting. Asia trade in the new global order, because the world has changed. And we can expect China to move as quick as the Western world would like them to do, because it's still a socialist country. And actually we should feel that China today is one big step forward already. Because what he has been talking about, globalization, liberalization, free trade, and all this. And I just feel that besides bilateral, we have to think of plurilateral. Because we are talking about FTA in the whole region. For example, this gentleman mentioned ASEAN FTA. And ASEAN, we are very happy that Hong Kong, we just participated. We thank you for the friends from Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia. They all supported us to have the FTA in ASEAN. We also would like to be in RCEP, not only in the ASEAN, RCEP. And actually, for example, when we are negotiating in APAC in Da Nang, we always look for TPP. But US feel that it's maybe not for the benefit of it's too early. I don't understand why, but they just do not want to participate. Therefore, for Japan, for Vietnam, they think of a new term. I just learned a new term called the CPTPP. CPTPP is a new term.
Yes, it rolled off the tongue, didn't it?
Yes,
I looked at that. They've rebranded it in a more
progressive
complex
TPP. That's a new term. Therefore, everybody is looking for free trade agreement in the whole region, be plurilateral, not bilateral. Because bilateral means only between two countries. It's not only trade, economics, but it's more political, many things get involved. We want to have a free trade agreement. Therefore, we are looking for RCEP. Actually, for APEC, we look for FTA-AP. That is FTA for the Asia Pacific.
Yes.
That is what we are looking for. Therefore, for US mention about China and US, I think it's for the G2, the two big guys that are playing the games. What we are looking for is the free trade for the whole world. That's the concept behind. Therefore, we hope that we have to understand China. It is a socialist country. It's moved very quick already. To our surprise, sometimes what President Xi is talking about, we felt, oh, we couldn't imagine that he mentioned all these terms in the past few years. It's a socialist country, but he's talking about free trade, globalization, co-prosperity, all these things. We just feel that China's done quite a lot already.
Okay. Let's move back to Europe now, and Anne Ruth, you were nodding furiously at certain points during Patty's moderate and measured predictions for the UK and Europe.
Well, if I were a UK citizen, I would be as passionate and furious as Patty Ashdown was about leaving the European Union. But here I'd like to offer a perspective. I think at least we now know what the negotiating themes are that the European Union and the United Kingdom jointly will have to address and will have to find solutions for. So we are in a much better space now than we were about a year ago. And let me also remind you that Europe, the European Union, has stomached even more complex issues in its past, such as taking in a number of Eastern European countries into the European Union architecture, expanding the internal market, the single market, towards Eastern Europe, including the strategically very important Balkans and the Baltic states, coming to a degree of an accommodation with Russia in the wake of that, although that now is a less happy chapter currently. The European Union as a whole is a region with very strong institutions, a strong legal tradition. In certain parts, certainly in my country, which is Germany, a vision for the continent. And so I feel that if the British government can preserve a degree of stability, and we don't see a disintegration and not too many things coming from left field, that we should see the UK sail alongside Europe in the next 50 years. My concern and my worry is that currently believing that the UK will have, and I agree with Paddy, will have advantageous and solid and stable trade deals with the rest of the world. I cannot see how that will work. And I'm also concerned that the extremely well-educated, open-minded, globalized British elite will be absorbed for the next 10, 15 years to come with managing just one issue, which is Brexit, rather than projecting, the values that the values of the Anglo-Saxon world beyond its borders. And I know that, for instance, that is so precious to Asia. On our topic, global trade, I'd like to look at it perhaps with a question mark in the following way. We had hoped as Europeans and in the Western world that TTIP, which is now frozen, would propel us into an area where the Western world, jointly then with ASEAN chipping in, to set standards, to come to regulatory complementarity. I don't see how that can now happen. I have a question mark about regulatory expansion of China. What is the comparative advantage of ASEAN in that new environment? I think that is a strategic consideration we should undertake.
Okay, we'll get back to that ASEAN question in just a moment. But Paddy Ashdown, stability.
Can I ask Anne a question?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I don't disagree with her analysis, by the way, although I don't think it will necessarily end up in quite the happy circumstances she describes. I do, however, think that she's dead right in saying that if we pursue this course, you will find the entire British energy for the next decade sorting out the aftermath of Brexit, and we'll have energy and room for very little else. I think in terms of the trade deal, it's my view, I just wonder whether it's Anne's, that actually the British government is not going to be able to negotiate with the European Union a bespoke trade deal. We're going to be offered a series of models. Is it Canada? Is it Switzerland? Is it Norway? That, it appears to me, is the way that it's currently going. Now, it might be Norway with a little tweak here or there, but it will look like a trade deal of the sort that is already in existence rather than something made uniquely for the British. Is that your view as well, Anne?
It could turn out that way. I'm not sure. I don't think we currently focus on it has to be the Swiss model, the Norwegian model.
No, we're offered a range, and you can choose one of these, an a la carte, if you like. Well, let's wait. That's the noise coming out of Brussels at present. By the way, I don't agree with Anne that the European Union has dealt with things more complex than this. I was personally involved very much in the Balkans and Bosnia, and I can tell you it was nothing like, politically more dangerous, politically more difficult, but nothing like as complex as we're now confronting. It's a really fascinating discussion, Michael, and I'd like to come back and pick up something slightly broader than we've been talking about. The first thing was, Cesar, I think, has really hit an important point, guys. You think you're here negotiating trade deals within the framework of the world, multilateral, open trading, reduction of tariff barriers and so on. You must look further than that. And Cesar was right, because if it is the case you cannot carry the people of the countries who are the trading nations with you, you're going to find a rise in populism and a rise in protectionism. And although you will not think of that within your scope, how we share the benefits of globalization is crucial. And by the way, and Cesar touched on it again, and I agree with him completely, if you think this is a difficult problem now, it's going to get immensely more difficult once the revolution of robotics comes in, because you're going to find more and more of the means of production in fewer and fewer hands. And unless you have a mechanism for sharing that wealth, you could well find instability beginning domestically, and that will have an effect on the global trading structure as well. I want to introduce, if I may, a slightly sharp point, which will not, I think, be welcome to many of my Western friends. I actually think what we're dealing with here is and Jonathan Choi touched on, I think you used the phrase, Jonathan, to reshape the world systems. I think that was, I noted it down when you used it. I think you're beginning to see the end. What we're seeing is the beginning of the end of 400 years of the domination of the West on global institutions. And I use 400 years because it's the end of the Ottoman Empire, which I think was where that begins. We have dominated all of these institutions, and now that is a shared space. And I think that's the, as it were, mental change that we need to make. And I then think that looking at this and looking at the sort of voluntary withdrawal of the United States from leadership of the multilateral space, and voluntary withdrawal, I have to say, of Britain, who's been a very strong player in there, the leadership of the multilateral space, the space upon which we all depend if the world is to be decently managed, and you guys depend on if it's trade as well, is now up for grabs. And it seems to me that Beijing is now saying, we want a part in this. And there's a real opportunity. I mean, I think Mr. Trump has left a space where China can move in and begin to take a constructive and responsible part in providing. My guess is Beijing wants, looking at them, Beijing wants a basically rule-based world order. Now, it may not necessarily be our rules, our Western rules, but what they want is a rule-based world order. And I think that's what the rest of us should want as well. And I think ASEAN has a really important role to play in that, if we are talking about that. So the real question, it seems to me, if we are to preserve the multilateral space for all the reasons that we need to do, resolution of conflict, dealing with the green, dealing with the environmental challenge, and of course trade, we must now begin to think of what does the leadership, what is the disposition of powers about the leadership of the multilateral space. And I think we have a new constellation of powers now ready to move into that. Thank God the European Union is absolutely committed to that. Thank God it is. That at least gives us a stake in this. But I think we are now looking at what is something which looks much more like a shared space than it has a Western-dominated space for the last 400 years or so.
Paddy, really keen to explore that. By the way, delighted to have your questions and comments. Please feel free to engage. We welcome it. If you do wish to ask a question, just put your hand in the air. We'll bring around some microphones. Identify yourself and let us know who you want to ask a question of. Please be involved in the discussion, because it's a very important one. But Jonathan Choi, Paddy makes a very, very good point. Who's going to set the rules? Is this the Beijing aim, to set the rules, to fill the void that seems to be being left by the US? And where does ASEAN play in? Let's start with you.
I just feel that Beijing doesn't want to really set the rule. But since this gentleman said very clearly that in the past 400 years, the Western world set the rules of the game, especially for England, UK, and US. But the situation has been changing, you know. US feel that it's America first. We don't really care about other things. We care about America's interest. That's one thing. Therefore, give some room for other people to really participate. Therefore, UK also, you see, you want to leave EU. It is another new situation in the Western world. Therefore, Beijing together, you know, China today, you like it or not, is the biggest trading country in the world. They're the #1 trading country. Therefore, of course, they get more involved. And they have the way of doing things. Therefore, whether they set the rules of the game, I don't know. But I just feel that maybe they're in the terms that they may really participate in the vacuum because the world is changing. Because Asia trade is in the new global order. What is global order? Global order is changing every day. And today, you like it or not, the economic gravity is moving from the west to the east. The east is China, Japan, Korea, ASEAN. That is Asia. And it's now coming up quickly. And happening in the Western world, you know better than I do. I just feel the world is keep on changing. And of course, China today is one of the biggest trading country, the second largest economy in the world. And they, of course, they want to participate more. And also, the idea is changing, especially under President Xi, on the environmental, security, many things. Is he want to reach globally, not only in China. That's my comment.
So, Cesar, are we looking at a rule-based global order, but Asia setting more of those rules, China, possibly ASEAN?
Well, ASEAN can actually play the catalyst in this, in pushing forward globalization. Because if you look at ASEAN, it's the least threatening of all the regions of Asia. And we've seen that ASEAN has engaged Japan, China, Australia, New Zealand, India, now Russia, etc. No? So ASEAN can play that role, and it's to its interest that it does so. Obviously, we want the Doha round to be concluded. No? That's the simplest thing for everyone. No? But while we're, my concern, and while we're so concerned about the domestic political repercussions of trade, there's many things creeping up behind us that we must deal with. That's international and global in character. That's the coming of more and more technology, yes, which I think will create so much job destruction, which will create so much polarization within and among countries. That is a big concern for ASEAN because we need to educate people. We need to have the resources to make sure that we can actually become players in that fourth industrial revolution. At the same time, we have a global threat, and that's climate change that we also have to deal with together. So I think the new global order must start with the premise that we are in this together. We are facing substantial opportunities and threat, and therefore we need to really complement each other, enhance each other, and therefore approach this in an enlightened manner. And ASEAN can be a player in that.
The US, the America First policy, one would have thought that as AI, as technology changes, cost jobs, which inevitably will that actually further reinforce the America First policy and make the US tone even more protectionist?
I think we're still looking to see what this American First policy is. And I think that we can't equate President Trump's with a fully thought out and implementable set of policies. So you have to distinguish between President Trump's tweets from time to time, and then you have to look and say, okay, what is the United States really doing? And yes, they did pull out of the TPP. I mean, I don't think it's unreasonable for a new government to say, if we're about to enter this hugely important trade agreement, and if we've been concerned about how some of the other trade agreements have worked out, maybe we should take a look at it. Now, President Trump has taken a more extreme position than just that. But even President Clinton was going to do that, right, if she had been elected. So I think we don't know exactly what the American First policy means. My sense from spending a fair amount of time in Washington talking with people in the new administration is that there are a lot of pretty basic questions that they're still trying to sort out. In the meantime, I agree with those who have said that the U.S. has not articulated a clear vision for where we should go from here. And I think that that's something that we're missing. But I think that we're going to get more of that in the future, because everything that the United States has been in the past has not disappeared in its entirety in a flash. We still have our Constitution, we still have our institutions, we still have people who have been very thoughtful on these topics. So we have to evolve on this. Having said that, you know, we have real challenges right now. There do need to be some adjustments, and that's what we're all trying to respond to in our different ways. Let me just say that, you know, to the extent that China has been trying to put forward an alternative model, and some of the rhetoric sounds like that sometimes, I don't think it's a model that really is scalable or that can be so useful for other countries. If you can lure investors in your country because you have a market of 1 billion people, and if there are other countries that are very open to your exports, then you can follow the China model. But I don't think that's something that can be sustained, and I don't think it can apply to every country. So we have to think very carefully about the different approaches that are out there. We have to distinguish between rhetoric and reality, both in the United States and in China. And I think we have to do a lot of introspection right now for the direction we should go.
Thank you. Let's bring in the audience now, please. Again, raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. We'll bring a microphone around to you. Who would like to ask the first question? Over there, please. Name and organization, if you wouldn't mind, please, sir.
Thank you so much, and congratulations for great presentations. I would like to ask probably to Mr. Purísima or Mr. Choi about all the role that could play other regions like Latin America in this equation of projection of Asia, because it's not isolated. We are sharing Latin America and Asia, the same arena that is the Pacific. I would like to listen a little bit about it. And the second question is about, Mr. Purísima mentioned about the role of the business people more than the governments. I would like to see your valoration, listen your point of view about how is developing this collaboration between the business world.
Thank you very much. Let's start with that second question first, because you mentioned the Nestle experience, and we have a roundtable later where we're talking about private sector engagement to drive ASEAN integration. What role can business play? And then I'll come to you, John.
So I describe it as enlightened business. So at the top, you know, business make decisions as to where to locate their facilities. No? Obviously, to attain the utmost efficiency, they'd like to have it in one location. So enlightened business means you don't go for the maximum efficiency, but really a win-win location where you sub-optimize on your decision just to make sure that there are more countries that benefit from your asset allocation decision. At the same time, at the bottom, no, you can look at it as a big brother, small brother concept, where instead of going for convenience in your supply chain, you know, going for you know, the assured suppliers of goods, you develop supply chains within each of your locations. A good example, those of you who've been to the Philippines, Jollibee is a very popular fast food chain that is leading in our country. Before, it used to import its onions and tomatoes from as far as the US, because it's so much easier. You know, you just talk to one company, you get all the tomatoes and onions, same sizes, at the right time that you want. But they realized that that's not going to help the communities around them. So what they did was they teach the farmers around the Philippines on how to grow the tomatoes and onions that they needed. So it took them more effort and more money, but in the long run, they were able to actually source everything within the Philippines. So that's what I call enlightened business. There are others trying to do that. Unilever doing some coconut. In Vietnam, for example, I think Macro tried to develop the fish supply chain so that it can be a replacement for cod. No? So there are many opportunities. It takes more effort, but in the long run, I think business, if it is to see its operation sustainable, must do it in an enlightened approach. And that way, the backlash against globalization is much less because people see that they are actually winning. And it's happening to a certain extent in ASEAN. For example, the Philippines is the back room. Singapore is the treasury center where more of the advanced processing is done. Vietnam and Malaysia is also doing that. So we complement each other, enlightenment and complementation.
Jonathan, would you agree?
I think for the trade between China and Latin America or South America, I think it's a big opportunity. You know, China is 1.3 billion people, and the consuming power is coming up now. You see, for example, in the past, we don't really import so much meat, but now we import tons of meat from South America. And at the same time, China needs a trading partner in South America because of the population. They are electronic manufacturer, industrial products, consumer products. They don't want to sell to Latin America and South America. I think for the trade between China and these areas is a very big opportunity. But my worry is if the trade is too big or the investment is too big, may be sensitive because it's close to America.
Just a quick thing to that. 400 years ago, the galleon trade between Latin America and China was actually the main trade link of the world, no? Going from Acapulco to Manila. No? So I think we're just going back to 400 years ago, but in a different
different context. Michael, can I ask Jonathan a question that's been fascinating me? I mean, I don't think China's in a very powerful position, but it's not got everything on its side. It's got some problems as well. I rather doubt whether you can have a liberalized economy and you suppress the liberalization of your society, but we'll wait and see. And I also get concerned sometimes, as I'm sure others are, about the indebtedness of Chinese banks a bit. But the really big issue, Jonathan, if I may use your first name, is the aging Chinese population, because this is a really big issue coming down the track, a big problem for China. And there's two ways you can deal with that, and it has a profound effect on trade. Mm-hmm. One is to take the traditional route that's been taken by many Western countries, and that is offshore your production, and then you help us, and you create the wealth from that. And the second is open yourself up to immigration. When that moment comes, which of those two routes do you think China will take?
I just feel, first of all, today my position is China, Hong Kong. I don't really represent China.
I realize
China, Hong Kong.
but everybody's presuming you do.
Hong Kong is part of China. I don't feel, you shouldn't feel
your views, that's all.
Only my views, I'm not a spokesman. And aging problem in China, I fully agree with you. But I just feel that China is very advanced, very smart. First of all, some of their production, they're moving to where? ASEAN country.
Yeah.
Vietnam, yes. Philippines, Indonesia, they are just moving out. That's the reason why they have so-called the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah.
They have infrastructure, investment, they have all these things are coming out. Secondly, to solve the aging problem, I think they're smart to use technology. AI is what they're using in the future. There's so many robotics factories in research, developments in China today. And what they're looking for, I think in the future, there's a big opportunity in China, is for the so-called the silver economy. Just for the old people.
Yeah,
for the healthcare.
We had one of those too.
Yes, yes. Therefore, Japan, all this Korea, they're coming to China for hospital, clinics, healthcare. All this big opportunity in China. I think China today, we have to understand that in the past, they were quite, I would say, quite backward. But they're learning very fast. They learn the best from the West. Yeah.
But that will have a profound impact on trade, won't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yes.
That route that you're taking already, both the AI and the access.
Yes, yeah, that's the future. But for the AI, I think technology is strong in the Western world. But China is very strong in R&D also. Yeah. They're just coming up so quickly. You see what's happening in Shenzhen. Hong Kong, we are a bit worried.
Yeah, so we have AI, we have aging population, we have climate change, which you've touched on. There are various other factors outside who sets the rules and what regulatory changes there might be that are having a massive impact on trading architecture. Let's go back to the audience now. Next question, please. Sorry, there.
That gentleman.
Yes, thank you. Name and organisation, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Hello, Alistair Campbell from Bridger Intelligence. I'd like to make a comment on the other elephant in the room, which nobody so far has mentioned, and that's India. Would any of the panelists like to comment on the potential effect, the influence of India in the New World Order?
India.
India, yeah.
please.
Well, that is why ASEAN actually has engaged India, because the natural counterbalance in the region for China is really India. And pretty soon its population will actually be more than China. They referred to the aging of China. India's average age is only around 29 years old. Now, so there will be also a natural supplier of human resources as you know, the other parts of the region age. ASEAN, the vision of ASEAN really is to be the hub of Asia trade, where trade between India and China can go through ASEAN, or between Japan and China can go through ASEAN. And I think ultimately, if we can complement each other, then we can really come and design the new world order that will allow us to face the common challenges together.
India also participates in the RCEP. If RCEP FTA can be done, it is the biggest FTA in the world. Therefore, we need India to get involved. Of course, Australia and New Zealand. And for India and China, it's so-called the dragon and the elephant. And these are two big countries. If they can really collaborate, I think it's good for the whole world.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is that India has got a very strong tradition of international engagement and of multilateralism. It goes right the way back to the Bandung Principles, as some of you may remember. You can think back that far. And I think India, you know, if India and China do get themselves, and if you can prevent a confrontation, and you wish to take up the reins of influence and perhaps even leadership in the multilateral space, I think that could make a profound effect.
And Ruth?
I agree completely with Paddy.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Not many people do that.
On everything? On everything? No.
Quite rare, actually.
And Tim, India is, we just mentioned the huge population, world's biggest democracy, has some problems, but a big player in the global trading order.
So one of the relatively new rhetorical frameworks that the U.S. has put forward when President Trump was here was talking about the Indo-Pacific region. Yeah. So I'm quite sure that in the U.S. thinking, they're looking very much at the constructive role that India can play in all of this.
Okay. Time for one final question. Who would like to ask the last question? Sorry. Oh, so okay, there first. Sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Oliver Kelly from Merlin Entertainments. Question for Anne-Ruth Herkes. Given all the rise of nationalism in EU countries, which country could be next behind Brexit? Or is that now impossible given what's happening with the negotiations?
You've realized my penchant for optimism by now. I think we are about to find a regime, a stage, a disposition whereby we will walk the talk towards more stability, prosperity, and the rule of law, and a resurgence of the liberal credo in Europe. Remember, we were extremely worried about elections in France, and they have produced a result that is very heartening. We were extremely worried about elections in the Netherlands, and those as well didn't produce the alarmist projections that abounded at the time. I think the Catalan issue is, to a degree, under control. I say this with all caution, to a degree under control. I don't know what Paddy will say about all the worries we had about Scotland in the first days of the Brexit, of Brexit fallout. So Germany will have, after a period of great flux in the last 10 days or so, will have a renewal of the hitherto government coalition, which will spell stability, obviously with a price attached to it, but with a leader with known credentials, known positions. Our position on economic policy, on international matters, and domestic priorities are well known. So, on the whole, I think let's look towards what really matters in Europe, and not give in to speculation about Europe being on the verge of further disintegrating.
I agree with Anne-Ruth.
Good.
I mean,
right.
If you'd allow me just out of thought, look, there was real fear that where Britain led, the rest of Europe would follow. Indeed, Boris Johnson, heavens above, do I have to mention him? He actually predicted with great fanfare during the referendum that this was an age of, we were going to set loose a liberation movement across the rest of Europe, that we would start and they would follow. They did nothing of the sort. The support for Brexit parties in Europe, having watched Britain do it, has plummeted in every single country. We worried that, as Anne-Ruth said, that Kurt Wilders would come in Holland. He didn't, he was beaten. We worried that Marine Le Pen would arrive in France. She didn't. She was roundly beaten with 60% of the vote against her, and an avowed liberal European internationalist marched resolutely and with considerable majority into the presidency. We were worried, and who would not be, that remarkable leader of yours, Angela Merkel, who recommended to her country that they would take 1 million refugees, 1 million refugees. That would have destroyed any other leader, but she survived. And she survived, it seems to me, extraordinary. She is a quite remarkable leader, in my view, amongst the Western nations. So I draw the same conclusion as Anne does. It isn't to say that Europe is not without its problems. I mean, you've got extremist right-wing governments in Hungary. There's nearly always an extremist right-wing threat in Austria that's not necessarily connected with European things. It goes right the way back into history. But in other countries too, there are problems. But it seems to me that this round of elections, exactly as Anne-Ruth has said, that European leaders have decided, and their publics have broadly supported them, in the current condition Europe finds itself, to reject Anglo-Saxon exceptionalism and isolationism in favor of European solidarity. It seems to me we've passed that kind of tipping point. And if that's true, then I feel much more comfortable in my bed.
Well, as Paddy's going to be comfortable in his bed, we better draw a line under the discussion now. I'm afraid we are out of time. Clearly, we are in the midst of a dramatic shift in the world trading order. Not only policy decisions that will be made in the US and China will impact that, but as we've touched on, AI, climate change, and the rise of ASEAN, and of course, how the Brexit situation plays out. Please join me in thanking my guests, Cesar Purisima, Tim Stratford, Jonathan Choi, Anne-Ruth Harkis, and Paddy Ashdown. Thank you very much. We're going to take a break now. Please be back in 30 minutes for our next session. Thank you very much.